the only show focused on stars' improvement strategies and the leaders who implement them. This is the Rising Stars with Rex Wallace Show, brought to you by Hyperlift.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rising Stars. Gosh, Mick, it feels like it's been a minute since we had an episode, so it's good to be back with you.
It's good to be back with you, my friend.
And it's good to be back with I think what's going to be a heck of an episode. It's we've long been interested and talked about the characteristics of high performing health plans, right? We talk a lot about the culture of quality, organizational excellence, and today we're going to talk about an organization's ability to innovate and stay ahead of all this change that keeps coming at us from CMS, right? And these last couple of weeks have been no exception, with the recalculations and the scan lawsuit and the implications that has to the whole industry. So we're really going to get into the how that ability to innovate correlates with actual star ratings performance. It's a fascinating conversation with some real information, some real evidence behind it. So thrilled to introduce our first guest, Peet Van Biljon. Sorry, did I get that right, Pete?
It's close enough.
So known Pete for a while, and he is an adjunct professor, teaches public policy and innovation at Georgetown. Has worked in the innovation practice at McKinsey. He's he literally wrote the book on innovation, right? So he's an innovation expert, and now he's actually digging into the correlation between innovation and star ratings performance within health plans. And we've been working on this project with him, and I'm excited to hear about the findings that he has, and just to get more background. We also have as a guest today, welcome back, Nate Lucena. Nate's Chief Strategy and Analytics Officer here at RWC, and I think most of you know him already. So Nate, good to have you back too. So super excited for today's conversation. Pete, maybe take just a few seconds and give a little. The people don't know you, right? This is your first time on. You're not like a conference speaker in our industry, right? You're kind of from the outside and given this really unique perspective. So I really want people to understand who you are and what your credentials are, kind of your background. Just maybe give 30 seconds on that, if you would.
Well, thank you very much. I've been a student of innovation, I guess, for over 15 years now, after kind of starting out, as an engineer and doing a lot of aerospace stuff. And when I transitioned to consulting, I happened to get experiences in studying innovation and actually researching it thoroughly. It started when I was leading the innovation program at the former corporate executive board, which is now part of the Gartner organization, and looking into things like open innovation portfolio management, and looking at what the top 500 firms in the country were doing there, what the best ones were doing differently. And sort of that kind of continued as I went back to McKinsey for the second time, and that time it was to manage their global innovation practice, which gives you a lot of scope. You work with a lot of client service teams who work with clients in all sorts of industries across the world. And and I was also involved there in an innovation survey that got deployed through the McKinsey quarterly panel, and got us some very interesting results. After I left McKinsey, I became an independent management consultant, but I often work with other consultants. Like I had the privilege to work with Rex in the last couple of years and so on. And I've also been teaching, as Rex mentioned, innovation and public policy to grad students at Georgetown University. And as I say, the highest form of learning is teaching. So that's been a real learning experience for me. It led to the book that I wrote that was inspired by that course. And when I did all the research for the book, I was inspired to do more. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. So I wanted to do some original research in the broader area of how can public policy, how can the government effectively help to induce innovation in the private sector more. And that, of course, is a very broad terrain, so I had to narrow it down. And there was some research that showed that contracts, procurement contracts that are not innovation related, um, can actually also seemingly lead to more innovation in the private firms that receive them, and that's was intriguing to me. So I was looking for a way to get a proper case, right? To get a case to experiment in or at least a quasi experiment. And it was real happenstance that I worked with Rex and his team, a couple of years ago, because I got introduced to the Medicare Advantage program, and I came to understand that this was all the same program, but only people who score 5 or more stars get financial performance incentives. And since I'm studying this from the economic point of view, financial performance is the interesting part. So I basically uh, ended up using this as a case, and I'm happy to as we start talking about it more, to talk about why that was so interesting. But I found in Medicare Advantage a natural experiment of two groups of plans, right? The ones who get the star related quality bonus payment financial incentives, and those that don't, which then allows you to ask the question, are the ones that get these quality bonus payments more innovative than the others? And that in the end was what my research was about. I deployed a survey, I also interviewed people, and really looking forward to discussing the results today.
Great. Yeah, that helps kind of set the table, right, for what we're doing. So the research around public sector. So you were trying to determine if these government incentives for the star ratings program not only incented organizations to improve, but actually incented them to innovate and to be more more forward looking from an innovation perspective.
That's right. That's basically the question. Do these financial incentives lead to more innovation in the Medicare Advantage plans?
Right.
And what did you find?
Yeah.
I found that, and I have to be careful now since I have to be academic about this. I found that there is a significant correlation between innovation capability, also some between innovation output, and with innovation and stars ratings. Now, innovation capability, I created this index to measure it, and I filtered it based on the most meaningful capabilities in there. And all the capabilities were, just so people understand what we're talking about, they were phrased as behaviors, like we do this. For example, we we observe our members, we listen to the voice of the members, or we work with external partners, or we do this with our providers. So it was phrased in that way. And I played with a number of indexes based on the 35 capabilities that I tested. I also separated them into operational and more innovation related, because some of the people I spoke to said, no, it's all about operational skills that gets you to high stars. And true to some extent, but the innovation kind of gets you even more, right? And so I created this index, basically a single number out of 100 that represents the innovation capability of the respondent organization, and that very strongly correlates with star ratings. I'm talking about like R square of almost 0.7 and so on. So it seems like there's something going on there. Now the interesting question is, correlation is not causation, as everybody's been taught in their first stats class. So, what does this mean? Could it be that indeed that plans innovate so they could get higher star ratings, or could it be that it's the other way around, that plans with higher star ratings, maybe they can afford to do more innovation, they pay for it with the incentive payments, they just all, and maybe it's like a next level of evolution almost, to be able to innovate when you have 4.5, 5 stars. Or maybe there's some kind of interesting feedback loop where the initially your operational improvements get you to 3.5 stars, and then in order to go higher, you need to really find opportunities to inflect my member behavior or to do things that are getting harder and harder, and then you have to get innovative, right? So maybe innovation is kind of stepping things up. So these are all very interesting questions. My own instinct is that um, I think there's merit to all of them, because I know from my prior work at McKinsey and elsewhere, research-based work, that healthy organizations tend to be better at innovation. And if you think about it, innovation requires a lot of knowledge sharing. It requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of willingness to tolerate uncertainty, to do new things. So, if you're a dysfunctional organization, if there's misalignment internally, it's not going to be good for innovation. So, in my book, I actually said innovation's like the canary in the coal mine, right? So maybe when you measure innovation, you're also measuring to some degree the health of these organizations otherwise. And I think the other big insight, I think, where I came out is that, and I brought an economics lens and some of the latest theory and thinking around the economics of innovation to this. And a big school of thought is called evolutionary economics. So evolutionary economics is basically saying that companies compete in this Darwinian environment where they adapt or die, where things always change. They need dynamic capabilities, and one of those capabilities is to do new things or come up with new offerings, and generally just be able to um, do things in the face of uncertainty. And so there is this idea that maybe you know, innovation is, just another sort of evolutionary response, that the successful mutations, if you like, manage to do better, and the other ones don't. And then in discussions we've had, and I'd love to talk to you guys about that some more, and is the idea that maybe CMS wants that. Maybe CMS is constantly basically shaking the tree, and to make it harder and harder to get to the top, or also to stay at the top. And so what you're seeing is this adaptive behavior, which you could call innovation, or maybe you could call innovation just another adaptive behavior.
Well, you hit on something that I think is interesting there. First of all, I loved reading this. There's so much that I would love to dive into more. I think you talked about CMS, like what are they designed? How, what are they trying to create? And I think there are a number of factors, like probably the most basic example is this dynamic cut point structure, that the cut points are going to change, based on industry performance. And therefore, the plans don't know where the target's going to be. And so you're always having to try to drive to get whatever improvement you can to set yourself up to perform at the highest level possible. And I think that's some of what you're talking about, kind of these moving goalposts that forces innovation. But my question, a lot of people are going to have different views on what innovation actually means. A lot of times you're thinking about it has to be this big, brand new, challenging concept. When you think about innovation in what you've written, how would you define it, or how would you put a little bit more context around it for health plans?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, because as I interviewed people in the industry, I sensed that there wasn't, consensus on what innovation was at all. And so there is a definitional question. So basically the theoretical basis for how I think about innovation is, comes from, the economic father of innovation, Joseph Schumpeter, Austrian guy who became Austrian American and taught at Harvard many years. And if people know nothing else about Schumpeter, is that he coined this phrase creative destruction. That innovation is creative destruction. It means that entrepreneurs do new things, and that displaces the old things. And he very much used this Darwinian metaphor language. And when he defined it originally, he said it's new products and services, it's new processes, it's new ways of organizing. Um, so innovation, all of those things, right? So if you think about a Medicare Advantage organization, they may not think they're innovating when they're changing how they're organizing to kind of better deal with some new requirement, but that is innovation. They obviously innovation is using new tools, innovate. So, and there's degrees of innovation. There's incremental innovation, which quite frankly looks a lot sometimes to like operational improvement, and then there's more radical things you can do. So innovation also occurs on a spectrum. um, my own definition is that innovation involves some degree of creativity and some degree of analysis in order to create value. Because I'm talking backwards on that. If you're not creating value, why are you innovating? Innovation has to help your organization achieve its objectives. So I feel very strongly about that. So whether your objective is reaching the highest star ratings, saving costs, having better processes, meeting other requirements, those are all valid reasons for why you may want to innovate. And then the creativity and the and the execution basically, and analytical capabilities have to combine, because if you're just executing, then there's nothing new, it's not innovation. But if you're just doing creative things, well, maybe you're a great artist, but it's not. So innovation always comes with this duality, which I think is why people have a hard time getting their heads around it.
Yeah. Pete, when you're talking, so you're bringing me back to my former life as a researcher, and I used to research creativity, which is another aspect, right, of innovation. And there's this thing in creativity research, right, about inspiration versus perspiration.
Hmm.
So when I think about the feedback loop that you're talking about, I mean, there's definitely merits to kind of all of the sort of frameworks you laid out, but that's the one that speaks to me the most in terms of like my experiences with the health plans. And when I link that to this inspiration and perspiration part, really what that's talking about is you have to put in the work to have sort of a core level of competency in what you're trying to be creative or innovative about, in order to free you up to figure out how to break out of the boundaries, right, of whatever the common knowledge is in that sort of core competency. And so when I think about operational excellence, right, or the maturity of a health plan needing to get to a certain level, to free them up sort of creatively to think about what to do, in order to innovate and keep improving, uh, that aligns really well. And Rex, Mick, I'm interested in what you think about that with my experience in working with health plans all across the country, right? Of starting up a new health plan, and really needing to get your legs under you and make sure that all your processes are as good as they can be. And that does tend to get you to a certain level, right? But then in order to get kind of over that hump into bonus territory, you really have to start thinking a little harder about how to approach the problem in much more than just a baseline way. And you have to start getting creative and innovative about how you approach your provider partners, how you approach your members, how you grow. You have to start to work smarter, not harder, right? So moving from that perspiration part into the inspiration part becomes really, really important for getting there and then staying there.
And even for inspiration for the creative part, you need input, right? So what
Yep.
I've seen is that the plans who have these, and you can call them operational abilities, or you can talk to them about as innovation capabilities, but where they have the ability to listen to their members, to observe what their members are doing, where they have the ability to look at what other plans are doing, their competition, where they have the ability to kind of look around and see what new technologies may be useful for them. You need all those inputs to come up with good ideas and good new concepts. And, so I would definitely check the boxes. These are things you need for innovation, but these are also things that you need to just, execute well as well on the operational side. So there's an overlap for sure.
I
Yeah.
like when you've talked about, depending on where an organization is, you can have these kind of small incremental, innovation type changes or more broad ones. And I like the concept of kind of each plan is on a spectrum, around innovation. And some of it's going to be that basic blocking and tackling, just the operational improvements to get at a certain base level. So if there's a plan that feels like operationally they're kind of there, but where they need to see those gains is through the innovation improvement on, how they manage that innovation. Do you have suggestions about what they can be looking for, what they should be kind of how they should be approaching it?
I think one of the most important things is, if you want to proceed with innovation, is to have the not just the ability, but also the kind of the readiness to be willing to experiment a little. And this is where you really venture. This is actually, if you want to venture into the next level of uncertainty, which is what innovation requires you to do, you will be forced to experiment. But that's a good thing, because if you think about anything, right, if you've done all the analysis, if you've done all the research, but you still don't have an answer about something, the way to resolve it is to experiment. Do some little experiment that gets you closer to the answer. So, and this is a common trait that that all organizations who are good at innovation have mastered. They're basically saying, we're not just going to sit here and talk about the uncertainty and maybe do analysis paralysis because of that. Let's do a little experiment. Let's run a little pilot. Let's try this, maybe on a subset, with a subset of our members, or a subset of our providers, or whatever. And then do a quick experiment and then see what happens. Learn from that, and then maybe it doesn't work. But now you've resolved the uncertainty. You have an answer, and that is the value to the experiment.
And that's a lot of the stuff that I've heard you talk about before, is the quick experiment. It doesn't
That's
have to
right.
be this long drawn out, doesn't have to be perfection. Just get out there, take a shot, see what the results are.
That's right, and there are many ways to do quick experiments. If and this is often one of the things, if you're in the innovation consulting business, that you really have to nudge people to get comfortable with, right? So if you don't know if people are going to want to be willing to pay $100 for some additional offering or whatever, well, you know what? You don't need to do a survey of 2,000 of your members to find that out. Just get a quick focus group together, 10, 20 people, and ask them. How long does that take, right?
Yeah.
If you wonder whether your members will appreciate, a particular change in service or whatever, maybe you can put together a little experiment, and have some of the members basically, it's almost like A/B testing, like they always speak about in the consumer growth. Some of them get channeled to that new service, right, and then see how they react to it. There are, and so what we always encourage, as innovation practitioners, is this idea of getting comfortable with really quick and dirty experimentation. And it's it saves you cost, but the most important thing about it, it's quick. It saves you time.
I can see organizations on that maturity graph, right? If you haven't yet, and I think you said innovation may be necessitated when operational excellence has already been attained. So as far as piloting, doing those test pilots, I can imagine if I'm an organization that hasn't quite gotten through operational improvement, operational excellence yet, and I still have these foundational things that I haven't solved for that are pain points from my members, I'm probably less likely to be willing to invest in small pilots, because I feel like everything I do has to be meaningful to and big to solve these big pain points that I have. Is that the right mentality though? Would you agree with that, or would you say don't be afraid to innovate even if you
It,
haven't gotten to that stage yet?
I think that I think it's, obviously you need to have certain basic capabilities in place, and if you're still fighting huge fires in that area, maybe you should focus on that. Because those capabilities will also help you to innovate. But I think perfection can be your enemy too. You will never get perfect at
Hmm.
execution, or at have all the operational improvements exhausted. And so I wouldn't want that to be an excuse to say, well, I first need to be perfect, before I attempt something. Again, things can be attempted as a matter of degree, and so think of innovation, as muscle development. So maybe you're at the point where you think, hey, maybe we should try something new. Not Nothing too rough, right? Just a little bit. Let's just try something here and see how it works out. And you're starting to develop those muscles, right? And then the muscles get stronger, and it's really like an organizational fitness that then goes up. People see that they tried something a little different. It wasn't a disaster. And maybe they get a bit more confident. Maybe they learn something, so the skill levels go up. And by the way, that was a lot of the organizations who weren't doing well. That was one of the big hurdles that they complained about, that they didn't have the skilled people to innovate, and the ones who did well didn't cite that nearly as much as a hurdle to innovation. So again, start upskilling your people by making these little attempts, and that's a way to kind of build up those innovation muscles.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things to think about in the context of that is organizations' ability to balance risk aversion from true compliance-based consequences, and being able to thread the needle between ensuring that that takes place, but not getting so caught up in that it stymies your ability to think creatively about how to approach a problem, which is at least anecdotally something else that I think we find sometimes where an organization is so focused on compliance. And by the way, anybody listening, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be, but they're so focused on compliance that almost becomes the crutch or the excuse on why they cannot innovate or why they're not allowed to innovate. And some of that actually might be just a knowledge deficit, right? Like maybe the organization is not at the level of fluency with the material where they can, sort of be able to think outside the box and make sure that they're following the rules. It's just an interesting thing, though, to think about, within the context of folks who might be looking at results like this and saying, "Oh, but we have all these rules that we have to follow." You know what I mean? But everybody has those
Yeah.
rules they have to follow, and there are some organizations who are still figuring out how to operate within those bounds, but do potentially messy and nerve-wracking experiments to try and innovate around their results.
And so yes, compliance is important, but it shouldn't become an excuse for why you cannot do you know little
Mhm.
things. And again, I'm not advocating for going crazy here. I'm saying start little things. Do some, and maybe you're doing some of that already, and you call them operational improvements. And maybe you should look back and say, hey, we've actually innovated here. Maybe we should feel good about that. Maybe we're actually already better at it than we thought we were.
Mhm.
So yeah, compliance. And look, as we said in the beginning, I'm not a health industry expert, but there are other very high compliance industries as well. And I come from aerospace and other places where, even like automotive that I've done a lot of work with. And it's often an excuse, right? Well, we can't do this because the specification says this or the standard says that. And often when you dig into it, you find that people have added layers of fat on top of what was maybe a real regulatory or a supplier specification, because everybody wants to be safe, so everybody adds another kind of layer of fat on it. So in the end, they've really reduced the space in which people can innovate just by adding basically all this padding on top of what is the real specification. So one of the things I would maybe ask people to do is, when you say that we can't do this because we'll fall out of compliance, is, are you sure? Are you really sure about that? Are you maybe overinterpreting what compliance means? So just
Yeah,
look at that first, and then you get to decide maybe what's your space for innovating.
totally, totally.
And I
I
like
had,
that. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
yeah, no, go ahead, Rex.
Oh, I was just saying, I like the idea of what you guys are saying as far as calling it innovation too, like going back and identifying this, because I mean, Pete, I think you're showing in your research that this Medicare Star Ratings program, I mean, that CMS has built it is it requires innovation to be the best, right? I think you've shown, and you alluded to it earlier, that 5-star plans have the highest innovation capability of anyone, right? So because they have to sustain that, and that is the hardest thing at all, to sustain 5 stars. It's hard to do it all, to improve, period. And in innovation, the ones who improve are showing they have a higher capability to innovate. So innovation is required, whether you call it something else or not. Adaptation, which I'm a fan of too, but I think it's important for organizations to sort of, I don't know, name it and claim it, right? Like, hey, we did innovate, we have innovated, and we have improved because of our ability to innovate. And I think it does something to the culture when you actually claim that.
Yeah, and you got to celebrate it too. So part of where the daylight was between the organizations who were good at it and those who were not so good at it, was that the leadership part of it. So that's the other part that we always talk about. It's like any organizational endeavor, leadership is important. So if you have leaders who celebrate innovation, who indicate that it's actually important to the organization, it makes a big difference. And so what I would suggest to people who are in leadership roles at Medicare Advantage plans is, maybe you already have quite a few things to celebrate. Maybe you should actually make a little bit of more of a big deal about it. If a team has come up with something, you know, put them on the podium, clap hands, give them a lunch voucher or whatever, just celebrate that, obviously, because that, and publicly almost in your organization, because that sends a message, it sets a tone.
Well, there were a few things that jumped out, especially, you were just kind of touching on kind of the organizational and cultural capabilities, how important those are to drive innovation. You talked about another thing about innovation partnership, and I do want to dive into that one a little bit, but maybe before I do, I'm interested in everybody's thoughts here. One of the things that you had identified is that a lot of the people that you interviewed said that some of the most highly valued skills or important skills for the STARS managers to have were adaptability and strategic thinking. And I think specifically around the adaptability to be able to understand a changing landscape and then make a shift. And frankly, guys, like, I think right now is such a good window into anything like that. You've got all the changes that have come through, with member experience weight, with potentially QI changing, reward factor, HEI, and then you do add in things like HEI, a completely different way to focus, especially if you used to be getting reward factor, and then all the stuff that now comes out with lawsuits. So it is that adaptability. How quickly are STARS managers seeing these changes, understanding what it's going to do to their plans, and then getting in there and innovating to figure out how do we best take advantage of this, because there's no cookie cutter, silver bullet here. It's looking at your organization and what do you need to do. So it resonated with me really strongly about that adaptability and strategic thinking as change comes in.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the thing is, uncertainty. People always think of it as a bad thing, but it can be a good thing for your organization. Research, I think that's been done by McKinsey and other companies, more generally in the strategy space, has shown that, industry rankings tend to be very static until some big change comes along, technology change, regulatory change, or whatever. And then the organizations who react best to that manage to really lift themselves up on the industry rankings compared to the ones that are too slow to react to it. And it is indeed a strategic ability, but it's also a strategic advantage to be able to say, yeah, it seems like there's some changes coming here. We're not going to feel threatened by it. We're going to look at it as an opportunity. If we are best able to meet these new requirements by CMS or whatever else, we can, we can uplift our standings here.
Yeah, for sure. Mick, were you going to ask about one other thing? Because there's one other thing I want to make sure that we cover. Yeah, go ahead.
About the innovation partnerships? No, go ahead.
Well, it's skipping over that a little bit.
That's okay. That's all right.
There's one thing I highlight. It's kind of buried towards the end, and within the context of everything that Mick just brought up around lawsuits, which in and of themselves could be considered, right, one of those black swan events that could fundamentally shift the industry, but also all the changes that CMS is sort of pushing into the star rating system. One might argue to downstream, improve innovation or things like that. But you were talking about your results and saying that some of your results around government agencies deciding to contract with private firms to provide public services to citizens, needing a sufficient level of competition for participating firms. It's an important thing. This may suggest giving some preference to nurturing a supplier base comprising of a larger number of small and medium suppliers to provide public services, which is interesting. We provide services to a lot of small and medium health plans, in addition to some of the behemoths. And I do know that one thing that folks are really worried about right now with all of the changes that CMS is putting into place in Medicare Advantage more broadly than STARS is having an unintended consequence of weeding out a lot of small and medium participants in the program, both on the provider side and on the payer side. Can you talk a little bit, just for a couple minutes, about maybe when this public and private partnership, when there's so much change getting pushed that potentially that innovation curve almost jumps the shark in some ways, where it actually, not saying that that's what's happening here, but it kind of goes into a place where it ends up sort of stymieing competition through innovation for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, right? Obviously on a very high policy level, and I think there's two things to maybe keep separate. The one is, that in general, smaller organizations are more nimble than larger organizations. So in general, one would think that smaller organizations could potentially be more innovative. All other things being equal. Now, what are the other things? Another thing is that large organizations are much better than small organizations with dealing with very complex regulatory and compliance requirements. So we've seen that in the banking sector, right, after Sarbanes-Oxley and in these other things, where the US used to have a lot more smaller banks, and we've seen a lot of consolidation across the last 20 years. So I think from a policy point of view, smaller will tend to get you more innovation just because of the organizational aspect of that. However, heaping more and more regulations onto your suppliers will tend to favor the big ones who have special departments who can literally fill out all the forms and do all the compliance and that sort of stuff. So there's maybe two countervailing considerations here.
Got it.
Yeah, agreed. And it's something I know we're all thinking a lot about with our clients right now, is the ability to deal with that and still even have the mental space for innovation, particularly as the industry refocuses on some of the things that Mick was talking about, that a fundamentally different kind of organization is positioned to succeed. But are there other forces at play here that's actually going to make it really hard for them to seize that opportunity, which I think is potentially what we're seeing.
So there's this term that's much more popular in Europe. It was coined by the Swedes. It's called innovation-friendly public procurement, right? And the idea behind that is, as if you can avoid over-prescribing what it is that the supplier has to give you, you allow that's more space for innovation, and that procuring agents should be very careful about saying we want that exact thing, rather than saying these are the general functional requirements. You have to deliver something that can do this for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not necessarily, because I don't have the expertise in the healthcare space, exactly sure what that would mean, but I would think that, and it's possible in any space, for maybe the regulator to think about, yeah, you can add more requirements, but the more you make them like functional requirements that can be delivered on in different innovative ways, rather than saying, excuse me, that you have to do exactly this or you fail.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the former rather than the latter will be literally innovation friendly.
Hey Pete, there's so much more we want to talk about with this, and unfortunately now we have to wrap for some conflicting client meetings that some of us have to jump to. But let's, whether it be really soon or after you finish your dissertation, let's definitely have you and Nate back on and talk about this, continue this conversation, because it's fascinating and it's definitely relevant. So thanks so much for being on. I'm glad that the industry is getting to know you a little bit better, and look forward to part 2 of this at some point in the near future.
Yeah,
So
I definitely
thanks.
want to dig in more here.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'd love to. So thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Excellent.
Us too. All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
See you next time.